There was a time in your life when you were not a federal taxpayer filing income tax returns. Then there was a time when you were. When and how did that change happen? Some people think it was when you got your Social Security number or when you got your birth certificate. That is not when you became a federal taxpayer. You became a federal taxpayer when you filed your first IRS 1040 form. You volunteered to become a federal taxpayer by signing that 1040 form and sending it to the IRS. In their legal terminology, you elected to become a federal taxpayer with that form. And chances are you were tricked into thinking you had to sign the form and send it to the IRS. Employers will often tell employees that they're required to do so. That is not true. The employer may request you sign forms like the W-2 or W-4, but the law does not require you to sign any form or for anyone to force you to sign any form. The employer is only requesting that you sign the tax forms because the IRS threatens them to do so, but the employer is not legally required to force their employers to sign any form on behalf of the IRS. Requiring you to apply your signature is a violation of your rights. To have a federal income tax, they must trick the citizen into signing things. If the government is authorized to do something, they do not need your signature to do it. Usually when you sign something for the government, you are giving up some of your rights. On that first 1040 form you signed, you identified yourself as a federal taxpayer, and you signed the form under penalty of perjury, thereby declaring the form to be true and correct under your personal authority. Of course, it would be in most people's interest to not sign and send any 1040 form in the first place, because that is the moment you become a federal taxpayer, when you declared yourself to be one. That's the bad news. The good news is you did not magically become a federal taxpayer because the government said so. You voluntarily elected to be a federal taxpayer in a contract, and that means you can revoke that contract at any time as long as you pay any tax that you have agreed to pay up to the date of your revocation. That means after you pay any federal income tax you have self-assessed for any given year, and before you file the next year's 1040 form, you may revoke your election to be a federal taxpayer. You may serve notice of your revocation of election to the IRS and the U.S. Treasury. Your revocation of election, if done properly, cancels your status as a federal taxpayer by revoking your original IRS 1040 form contract agreement. The forcible seizure of your earnings would violate the 13th Amendment to our Constitution, our nation's supreme law. If you do not live in a federal jurisdiction such as Washington, D.C., if you are not a federal employee or contractor, if you did not voluntarily elect to be a federal taxpayer, then it is highly unlikely that you owe any income tax, and there is no one who can say that you do. Income tax must be voluntary. Otherwise, it is slave trade, unpaid servitude, and it is an imprisonable offense. That is why there is a clear record of your 1040 form signed by you under penalty of perjury. Without your permission, the federal government cannot seize your earnings from your labor. You cannot be forced to sign anything. No one forced you to sign your first 1040 form. That was your decision, and it can be your decision to revoke that contract if you wish. Thousands of people have done that. They are no longer federal taxpayers, and they are violating no law. If you'd like to know more about revocation of election, contact us at feedback@freedomtaker.com. And if you know of anyone who is struggling with IRS issues, please share this video. This message is public notice and free speech protected by our nation's Constitution. Anyone who believes this message to be misinformation may, within 60 days of the posting of this video, provide legal reference showing any portion of this message to be inaccurate, and if we can verify that legal reference as applicable and valid, we will voluntarily remove this message. This message is for educational purposes and does not represent legal advice or service. FreedomTaker.com is solely responsible for the content of this video. The platforms which carry our messages are not the content creators of our posts and are not responsible for the contents of this message in any way, and therefore have no right to label, suppress, or remove our content. Anyone removing this message without our consent or without legal grounds will be subject to major monetary penalties, which will apply fully and separately to all responsible parties and their organizations. Any defamatory labeling or removal of this message by the host platform or any other outside party or agency without our consent constitutes agreement to those terms. Any person representing this message as unreliable or removing this message or ordering its removal without prior notice to us and without authorization from us will thereby be agreeing to pay major additional monetary penalties for that nuisance, violation, and damage. Our nation's Constitution prohibits censorship of and interference with this message.